When she stopped explaining herself, the moment she realized her words were falling on deaf ears, was the same moment she understood that silence could be her greatest power. For years, she had justified her choices, defended her dreams, and apologized for taking up space in rooms that should have welcomed her freely. She explained why she needed time alone, why her career mattered, why she said no to things that drained her soul. Every explanation felt like peeling away a piece of herself, offering it up for judgment, hoping someone would finally understand. But they never did, because people who demand explanations are rarely listening for truth. They are searching for weakness, looking for cracks in your armor, places where they can insert their opinions and reshape you into something more palatable, more convenient, more controllable. She grew up in a household where questions were weapons disguised as concern. Why are you wearing that? Why do you talk so much? Why can't you be more like your sister? Each question carried the weight of disappointment, the implication that she was somehow failing at being herself. She learned early that explanations were expected, that every choice required a defense, a logical argument to prove her worthiness of autonomy. So she became excellent at crafting reasons for her existence, packaging her authentic self into digestible explanations that might satisfy the endless interrogation of people who believed they had rights to her internal world. In her 20s, she exhausted herself explaining why she chose her unconventional career path to relatives who thought she was throwing away her potential. She detailed her passion, her strategic planning, her vision for the future, hoping that enough words would build a bridge between their understanding and her reality. She stayed up late crafting the perfect explanations, testing different approaches, trying to find the combination of words that would unlock their approval. But approval never came, because it was never about her explanations being insufficient. It was about them being unwilling to accept any path that differed from their narrow vision of success. Her romantic relationships became marathons of justification. Why do you need girls' nights? Why does your work matter so much? Why can't you just compromise on what I want? She found herself defending her basic needs for friendship, for professional growth, for maintaining the parts of herself that existed before the relationship. She explained her feelings with careful precision, trying to make her boyfriend understand that loving him did not mean erasing herself. But explanations in relationships with people who do not respect your autonomy are just negotiations where you are always bargaining pieces of yourself away, hoping to reach a settlement that preserves something essential. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when her mother called, asking why she had not attended a family gathering she had clearly stated weeks ago she could not attend. She began her explanation again, detailing the work commitment, the prior notice she had given, the impossibility of rearranging professional obligations. Mid-sentence, she heard herself, and something inside her cracked wide open. The sound of her own voice pleading for understanding from someone who had never once offered it without conditions made her physically ill. She stopped talking mid-explanation, and in that silence, she felt something shift fundamentally in her relationship with herself. That was the last day she explained herself to people who had no genuine interest in understanding her. It was not a dramatic declaration or a confrontational moment. It was a quiet internal revolution, the kind that changes everything while looking like nothing on the surface. She simply stopped offering up her reasons like sacrifices on an altar of approval that would never be satisfied, no matter how many pieces of herself she burned. The first time she exercised her new policy, her friend asked why she was declining an invitation to a party. The old version of herself began forming the explanation in her mind, the work she needed to finish the early morning she had scheduled, the need for rest and restoration. But the new version simply said, "I cannot make it, but thank you for thinking of me." The silence that followed felt enormous. Her friend pushed once more, pressed for details, for reasoning, for something concrete to argue against or accept. She simply repeated that she could not attend and hoped her friend had a wonderful time. The conversation ended awkwardly because people who are accustomed to your explanations feel robbed when you stop providing them, as if you have taken something that belonged to them. Her family reacted as though she had committed an act of violence against them. Questions that used to receive paragraphs of careful explanation now received simple statements. She was not available. She had other plans. She was not interested. Her mother accused her of becoming cold, distant, ungrateful. Her siblings said she had changed and not for the better. They wanted the version of her that bent herself into explanations that gave them ammunition to debate her choices, that performed the ritual of seeking approval, even when everyone knew approval would be withheld. The version of her that simply lived her life without consulting their court of opinion was unacceptable to them, because it revealed an uncomfortable truth. They had never actually wanted to understand her. They had wanted to control her. Work presented its own challenges. Male colleagues who questioned her decisions expected detailed justifications while never providing the same for their own choices. She began responding to why questions with data, with results with calm, redirects to the actual work, rather than the meta-discussion about whether she had properly justified her approach. Some colleagues respected the shift. Others became hostile because her refusal to engage in endless explanation cycles meant they could no longer use meetings as opportunities to undermine her authority through death by 1,000 questions. She noticed that the people who truly valued her never required explanations in the first place. Her best friend never asked why she needed space or time alone because she understood that friendship was not ownership. Her mentor never demanded justification for her career choices because mentorship was about guidance, not control. The new romantic partner she met did not interrogate her needs because healthy love does not require you to defend your humanity as if it were on trial. These relationships breathed easier because they were built on trust rather than constant justification. The anxiety she had carried for decades began to dissolve. She had not realized how much energy she expended preparing explanations, anticipating questions, rehearsing justifications for simply existing in the way that felt authentic to her. Without that constant drain, she had energy for creation, for joy, for the actual living of her life, rather than the perpetual defense of it. Her work improved because she focused on results rather than preemptively justifying her methods. Her relationships deepened with people who did not require her to audition for their approval daily. She learned to distinguish between people asking questions from genuine curiosity and people asking questions as veiled criticism. Genuine questions came from a desire to understand, to connect, to learn something about her inner world. These questions felt open, like invitations rather than interrogations. She answered these freely because sharing yourself with someone who creates space for your truth is gift exchange, not emotional labor. Critical questions came with preset answers. The asker already decided she was wrong and wanted her to provide the rope for her own hanging. These questions felt like traps because they were. Her decision not to explain herself was often misunderstood as arrogance or secrecy. People accused her of thinking she was too good to justify herself, of being closed off, of not caring about others' opinions. But the truth was more nuanced. She cared deeply about the opinions of people who had earned the right to her inner world through consistent respect and genuine care. She simply stopped performing explanations for people who weaponized vulnerability and used her openness as a map to her weaknesses. There is profound wisdom in knowing the difference between privacy and secrecy, between boundaries and walls. She discovered that when she stopped explaining herself, people revealed who they truly were. Some relationships ended because they were only sustainable when she was constantly proving herself, earning her place, negotiating for basic respect. These relationships felt like relief to release even when they were tied to family or long history. Other relationships strengthened because they were already built on mutual respect, and her new boundaries simply clarified what had always been true. A few people surprised her by rising to meet her new standard, by adjusting their behavior when they realized the old dynamic was no longer available. The professional impact was remarkable. When she stopped over-explaining her decisions and simply delivered results, her authority increased. Colleagues who used to derail meetings with endless questioning found themselves redirected to outcomes. Her confidence grew not because she became arrogant, but because she stopped seeking validation from people who had no investment in her success. Leadership noticed because leaders recognize people who trust themselves enough to act without constant approval seeking. She also learned that not explaining herself required her to be more certain of her own choices. When you cannot fall back on external validation, you must develop internal conviction. She became more thoughtful about her decisions because she knew she was accountable to herself first. This was not about recklessness or refusing feedback. It was about building a core sense of self that did not require constant reinforcement from others to remain stable. She sought counsel from trusted advisors, but she stopped seeking permission from people who had no stake in her well-being. The social consequences were real. She lost friends who only knew how to relate to her through criticism and correction. Family gatherings became tense when she declined to engage in the traditional patterns of justification and defense. Some people said she had changed, and they were right. She had changed from someone who believed she needed permission to exist into someone who claimed her right to live authentically without apology. Not everyone could make that journey with her, and she had to grieve those losses while honoring her growth. She noticed younger women watching her navigate the world without constant explanation. They asked how she did it, how she stayed calm when people pressed for justifications, how she maintained relationships without exhausting herself in defense of her choices. She told them it started with recognizing that explanation and communication were not the same thing. Communication builds understanding. Explanation to people who refuse to understand is performance. She taught them to notice who ask questions to learn versus who ask questions to judge and to adjust their energy accordingly. Her relationship with herself transformed most profoundly. She stopped conducting internal trials where she had to convince herself she was worthy of her own choices. The voice in her head that sounded like every critical person she had ever known grew quieter. In its place emerged a clearer sense of her own values, her own vision, her own voice. She made mistakes without needing to defend them to an imaginary jury. She succeeded without needing to justify why she deserved success. She simply lived, and the simplicity of that was revolutionary. When she stopped explaining herself, she reclaimed the energy she had been hemorrhaging into the void of other people's judgment. She redirected that energy into building the life she actually wanted, rather than the life she could most successfully defend. She wrote the book she had been too tired to write. She traveled to places she had previously felt she needed permission to visit. She rested without guilt, because she no longer needed to justify her human need for restoration. She said yes to opportunities that excited her and no to obligations that depleted her, and she did both without the accompanying essay about why. People still asked why. They asked why she made the choices she made, why she lived the way she lived, why she could not just explain herself so they could understand. But she had learned that people who genuinely want to understand you do not require you to defend your existence. They observe, they listen, they respect the mystery of another person's inner world without demanding you make it smaller and more palatable for their consumption. She saved her words for these people for the relationships where explanation was exploration rather than justification. In the end, when she stopped explaining herself, she did not become less connected to others. She became more connected to people who valued connection over control. She did not become closed off. She became more open with people who treated her openness as the gift it was. She did not stop caring about others' opinions. She started caring more about her own. And in that shift from seeking external validation to trusting internal knowing, she found the freedom that had eluded her for decades. The freedom to be imperfect, unapologetic, and entirely herself without needing anyone's permission or understanding to justify her existence. She learned that the most powerful thing a woman can do is stop explaining herself to people who are committed to misunderstanding her and that lesson changed everything.